organization of residents of Princeton Borough and Township with diverse backgrounds, interests, and talents. Princeton Future has grown out of a concern that much of the planning and proposed development of the critical downtown spaces have been proceeding in an unconnected manner. The aim of Princeton Future is to assist the municipal authority to take a forward-looking and more comprehensive approach. Investigation and consultation undertaken by Princeton Future indicates that these objectives are achievable with good planning. More detailed studies and further involvement of all concerned parties are, however, clearly called for.
Thank you so much for coming. We're hoping that this meeting would also help to bring out merchants so that we can further discuss the southern end of Witherspoon Street. But before we get to that, I wanted to update you on where we are. I'd first like to get a show of hands for those who have not attended the Witherspoon Street corridor meeting in the past, which had actually 4. Okay. So just under 10. So I want to be able to hand out some materials to you that were handed out at other meetings. Those who have attended before, I'm not going to give you duplicates, and for financial reasons, which you will learn more about later, we're trying to keep austere management of costs. The Witherspoon Street Corridor Study was initiated back in October. At least the concept was developed in August and September, but really came out of the many meetings that Princeton Future had as far back as 2001 that talked about the downtown, the community's interests in not only the commercial aspects, but the neighborhoods that abut the downtown, the kind of activities within the problems, the challenges, and how the community would participate in the future of the town's development. Of course, we're sitting in the library, public square that came out of many discussions around a desire for a public space that would accompany a garage that was being planned by the borough, but also downtown housing and a grocery store. And that came out of meetings with citizens such as yourself that talked about the needs in addition to accommodating parking, which seems to have risen to the top, but certainly is not the only interest in the downtown to be served. Our first meeting, I think was November 13th, where we talked, all of us in a similar circle, about our experiences on Witherspoon Street, our most recent experience. So we sort of went through an outline and talked about, before coming to the library that was a morning, what was your most recent use and experience of Witherspoon Street? It sort of got us started into thinking about what we like, what might need to be worked on, and what you recalled most vividly. How you rated the experience on a stream of good and bad, one to 10, and more specific in terms of what you like, what you didn't like, as I said before, and how you envision the street's future development, or future period, whether it developed or not. What came of that discussion were lots of thoughts about what we really thought Witherspoon Street is and should be in the life of our community. You know, it served many purposes as we identified. A set of values came out of that initial meeting, and it was defined or sort of grouped together that Witherspoon Street was valued for the shared experience it engendered, the familiarity of people and places it supports, the history of its neighborhoods, the diversity of uses and people it serves, and it is our street. It was a closing emphasis on the nature of its being more local than regional and national in its nature. The roles of the street were diverse in that it has many functions. It serves as a spine, which binds the skeleton of other streets in a network, as an artery where it's moving people, goods, and services through the community. It was the heart, the vital organ that drives all the functions and the spirit of the community. It's the main street that the importance of the place in the life of the community. It was a gateway providing access to the center of town. And it was a corridor, it was labeled a corridor for the purposes of the study that included not only the street as the functional element within, but the land uses adjacent to the street or on the street, as well as the fabric of the neighborhoods that surround it. Obviously, the characteristics were residential in much of the street, and that was the way people envisioned it primarily. The trees and the tree canopy were very important. People sitting on porches seem to have been a strong, important factor, and the liveliness of it. The concerns that challenged or faced with the Spoon Street redevelopment as a legal process, with the determination and actions thereto that create redevelopment, neighborhood preservation, in terms of buildings, character, as well as people within the structures, historic, archaeologic, anthropologic preservation of the street. There is a concern as to how terms are used when referencing a change, such as beautification and preservation, and what that actually meant. Impact on other connecting streets was also a challenge. The process of zoning and implementation is certainly on the list. The physical observations were that some of Witherspoon Street needs maintenance of unkept properties, vehicular traffic management, pedestrian and bicycling dangers addressed, maintenance of sidewalk conditions, consistent and sufficient lighting, improved bus stops, and alternate modes of mobility, and that was in response to the proliferation of automobile traffic. Now that I can actually pass out to those who have not received that list. And you would only take one. Or Sheldon, you might want to pass those out to those who have not attended in the past. Thank you. Okay. Where we've come in the process of, beyond that first meeting, we've had 3 workshops. The 3 workshops in December, consecutive Saturdays, were on the sections of Witherspoon Street. The northern, beginning at 206, the central section being a divide of Lee converged further south to Wiggins, and then from Wiggins to Nassau being the southern section. In that process, we had tables where there were recorded conversations and facilitators to discuss all the aspects of the street. The notes and minutes of those meetings are being developed and will also be available via web. They're very large files, so that I'm thinking we're not going to send them via email, so that they will be on the web. Those meetings resulted in a lot of discussion to much greater detail, the issues and concerns that have come out of just our general discussion at our first meeting. And what we're doing and what we passed out at a previous meeting is to look at each section and how that section has received comment. The organization of our study has 14 maps. There are basic sections that are landscape and open spaces, transportation and utilities, the land uses and zoning, character and history, and implementation. In order to produce that report, the Littwin Recorder Study has a team, which I'm a member, as well as Michael Mosteller, who's an architect here in Princeton, Kevin Wilkes, also an architect here in the area. Yes, I'm getting over to Holly Nelson, a landscape architect. Shirley Satterfield is our historian. And we are hoping to also have a transportation consultant to do a lot of the analysis on transportation system and planning. What are our challenges in moving forward? And I think we've come to a real important juncture with having had the first meeting with 3 workshops, and we had a meeting in January where we reported on an additional activity of the study. Is we have an advisory committee of many who had attended all of those meetings, who are making themselves available to attend even more meetings. And it's a great group of people. There are 18 that range from neighbors to school board members, parents, all kinds of representation. I use that loosely, but it's a broad group of people who you all know, because many of them are here, who are interested in working out further details. Between December and our January meeting, we held an advisory committee meeting. It was quite lively, very stimulating, and productive. What we're doing in line with the report and how it is structured is using a system where we've identified issues, concerns, make the observations, some of which we did in November, but continued through our workshops, and then the initial responses, sort of the hot and cold test of whether what's been observed is acceptable, needs work, and what might make things better. Now, in terms of moving forward into the actual options, a study that may be more physical in nature versus just words. The report, through its maps, would use this process of not only the overlays, but begin to, and the studies are actually being done in overlay, just to report in both graphic and as well as verbal mode what and how options might bring about the correction to problems or address issues that have been identified and concerns about how the future of the street and the area might develop. There, along with graphic components, there are also implementation and policies that are obviously they're verbal or perhaps even financial. And that is our last map, that's map 14. This all translates into a matrix, which I'll hand out to those who, again, had not attended previous meetings. And the one that you'll receive is the one from the north, Witherspoon. Now, since we've gotten past some of the basics here. Let me tell you where we are now. We've had another meeting of the advisory committee just February 5th, Saturday before last. We focused in this meeting on the central section, which would also result in another matrix of concerns, observations, and initial responses. That meeting also spent quite a bit of time on looking at land uses in question. It looked at the hospital site, and in that discussion, and it will be probably discussed even more as we schedule another advisory meeting, there were several points of discussion that sort of formed a general basis for how to proceed. The steps we began going through were graphic as well as policy. What we have developed to date is not necessarily for publication. We do want to have another advisory committee meeting, but there were some preliminary thoughts about how the hospital site might move forward. And there were strategies for how we would consider it in both policy as well as physical planning process. There are about 14 major points. That's not to say there aren't others in either more detail. And there are sort of 5 strategies for how to consider the site. The site, in its place within the community, is certainly something that has been discussed quite a bit in our first meeting and as well through the meetings of the Healthcare Task Force. What I think we have found with greater citizen participation and discussion about the hospital site and what it might become is that there are many options, but there are some real prevailing themes in that residential as a use is preferred, although there are many residential types. The residential types and the development of a site need not be single in approach, either through developer or in terms of land configuration, in terms of how the site is developed. It does not have to be en masse, it could be broken up in different parcels. And that there's also opportunity for bringing the site to the scale of the neighboring neighborhoods.
Could I do something?
Yes, you can.
To tell us to tell why we did that.
Right.
Some of you, this may be repetitive, and I've been teaching at a university meeting since 8:30 this morning continuously, so if I fall over, then come back and prop me back up. The residential thing actually is not incidental or we just made up out of whole house because it's an obvious residential site. In the sense, I think this building fabric, the zoning, the land use, and somewhat these 2 maps, the mobility and the others, would show why that's true. When we looked at the north, there's a clear community focus at the far north. But then there's a residential section here across from the school. When we came down and looked at this section, we saw that that was our mixed-use residential section, and the word that everybody was discussing was how to preserve and conserve that. The same was true here. Now, we haven't really discussed this, so I'm hoping later on tonight we will be able to discuss issues that relate to that. But if you see this, preserve residential character, and then you think of this, you think about it, I think, in a different way. If you go back over to the zoning, the fact that what we learned in our meetings were, the potential zoning instrument that we have available to us now may not be sufficient to prevent zoning that would allow us to create larger buildings and consolidate lots. We could consolidate, enlarge, and change use all simultaneously, which would completely change the character that's over here as residential character. But it would also change this map, which is that if we actually look at the street, it has a very fine grain. And that grain is a very much important part of its character, as well as the fact that it's residential primarily. In other words, if we change the physical character so that it would become more continuous kind of building, for example, we would then completely change this situation. And in other words, all of them add up to something that says, now let's look at this in more detail. That the potential that it should always be considered as smaller structures to fit with this map. The fact that the zoning might reflect that in terms that it is not one zone, but it could be broken up into parcels. And the fact that it would then be mixed use, multi-type, multi-cost, diverse, and affordable, follow from the consideration that we had in this discussion and this discussion. So that what our perspective enabled us to come up with as a suggestion is the fact that it should be primarily residential. And that residential should be more than one type of housing, more than one price, probably more than one building type, and it should somehow or another, as it evolves, preserve the diversity and infuse the community with affordable situation. So it followed from the overall discussion of the whole street.
I guess in addition to the preference for residential development, it was clear that when the term mixed use was being used, particularly if you're talking about the whole site, that as a definition may result in more commercial than would be desired. There were discussions further up, as Michael talked about, the character of the central area of Witherspoon, and its zoning being RB, which allows for 60% residential, 40% commercial. But each property is developed individually, and in many cases they are either all residential or a different kind of mix of commercial and residential. And there was concern amongst the advisor group not to encourage through a single developer plan the kind of commercial development that could result in that all first floor levels would end up being commercial and the upper levels the residential, which would still be very much commercial in nature in terms of that area. One of our advisory committee members said that would more or less result in a Palmer Square type of area rather than a residential neighborhood that may have a little bit of commercial. The kind of commercial that would be allowed, and this is not with any percentage approach, but that is more in a type, that it was small service type of commercial that would be sustainable locally, and it was not a regional commercial activity. There was particular discussion around what has been thrown around as a concept of a CCRC, a continuing care retirement community. And those are large developments with 3 different forms of housing, primarily independent, assisted living, and nursing home component. And that was felt by many that it would more or less be the same type of use that the hospital has today, and it would be in a scale that's larger than what, if the whole site was developed in that manner, what the community might be able to absorb, and I mean in a physical sense, not necessarily in a market sense. And that the locational aspects may not be appropriate. In fact, when looking at the hospital as a landowner, it was thought that the CCRC as a function might be better located at the Merwick site than on this site. However, there was an interest in some age, perhaps restrictive, and that term is sort of, it doesn't settle well with me, but age-specific housing where seniors may be accommodated because of the need to have an elevated building and the existence of an elevated building, and that is one of the physical aspects of the scheme, and the way in which the site, if looked at in a total site, might concentrate more dense development towards the center. The southwest corner of the site was considered to be an important area for broad community use of either open space or some other form of broad community use. There was a definite thought that there needs to be more consideration about the Franklin Avenue parking lot in the scheme, and that in the some of the discussions it's been talked about adding it to the cemetery land, but in the hopes that the cemetery actually would provide more public access, potential for walking as well as bikeways, so that as a trade-off is the objective, not just to provide more land. There was a real concern about how to minimize the impact of any development on that site, the hospital's land, to the existing public housing as well as the residents within them, and that should be carefully planned. There was a definitive, in the interest, I guess, of all taxpaying entities, that it would be a full taxpaying user, not a negotiated pilot payment in lieu of taxes that would circumvent other needs of the town and its resources. So that's just a basic summary. I mentioned to you that
the one thing I would add is we are going to try to do what we have done before for this area, which is some brainstorming about what the issue of housing all the way down, as opposed to, say, a commercial ground level, at a CCRC scale versus, say, a seniors building scale versus independent units, would depend upon the relationship to the exploration of the options of physical disturbance and what we would want to keep and what we don't want to keep. And I don't think we know the answer to that in any way whatsoever, theoretically or even practically at this moment. So we did outline a series of potential options. A no-build approach, the path of least disturbance, some minor disturbance, keeping the garage, some selective demolition. Remove all the smaller perimeter buildings as a third option. Keep some core buildings. Demo all buildings. But keep the parking and demo everything. In other words, what would happen if we try any of the above? I don't think we know the answer to that. Of course, they reflect
Michael?
back out to the types. Yes?
How does this fit into the master plan of the borough?
As far as I can, well, we are going to make recommendations to the master plan.
There's a master plan for the borough, right?
And this has zoning, and that's the standard.
But how does all of this fit in together? I mean, if have they made certain zonings that is predetermined? I mean,
No.
buildings being sold today that's going to be commercialized, and so how does that fit into the zoning, the master plan of the borough?
Well, there really isn't a plan for a hospital site. In terms of that as an area, it's zoned, in the surrounding area, it's zoned primarily residential with some options for commercial. The property is zoned hospital, which in the future could only be used for a hospital if it's not.
This is a hospital right here for me.
But the hospital is leaving whether we like it or not. It's gone, and the people that own that is gonna sell that for a profit.
Right.
Am I right?
That's what they want to do.
That's what they want to do.
Well,
But you
and there's
can't.
nothing we can do about it because
No,
they
no,
are in
no.
business to do that.
Well, right now they can own, we own the zoning. They can't sell it to anyone except another hospital.
But the point you're raising, I think, is that that area has to be rezoned, and the planning board is being charged to do that, or will be charged to do that. And that's why it's important for groups like this to make inputs to the people that are going to think about what's going to happen.
Hasn't that already been done?
No. In
Not at
fact,
all.
Okay.
Barry
So
and Marvin
there
Reed,
is no master plan for the borough, period.
there's a master plan for borough, but there's no determination of the use change for that site.
The master plan needs to be changed to take into account the reality that you postulate.
Exactly.
So how can they then already say that they might sell it to a hotel, that they can get it, that is a possibility? I mean, I have no clue, but they're gonna, if I was on the board of the hospital, I would sell it for the most money I could get for it.
Well, it happens that, I guess, yesterday or the day before, the healthcare task force report was released, and Barry is a member of it. Morgan Reed is the chair of it. And its recommendations of the 10 they made, several referred the use change, the use consideration to the planning board. And we're hoping that this process will help inform their process when that's conducted, because there has been quite a bit of study, and will continue to be, as well as input from the community about what the community's interests are in that site. And so this is the opportunity.
As late as 2 days ago, the mayor indicated that property should be sold to the university. That's not a hospital. And
Well,
they wanted to use it for occupation of people visiting the university. I mean, I'm trying to get, what is the master plan for Princeton that is directing all of this and all of these things that are flying all over the lot? And there is nobody that really has a real detailed plan of anything.
Well, it's not
Well,
one
that's
body,
why- That's one
but
of the
let's,
reasons we're here.
right.
Is that there's going to be a rezoning process. If we can generate enthusiasm and interest and cogency about a plan that also makes some sort of economic sense, perhaps it will influence what will happen in the interest of the discussions that have come out of our meeting. Otherwise, it is just simply going to be sold to whatever process occurs with some sort of economic justification alone. So we're trying to influence the instruments that exist in our community by presentations, by a report, that would allow the people who will make that decision, the zoning officials, to come to a good decision.
Maybe we should get Marvin just to
Yeah.
comment
Right.
on the
Marvin,
process,
I would-
because he's
The
going to be
report is
involved.
very clear. The property needs to be rezoned. It would need to be rezoned were the hospital to expand. It would need to be rezoned if something takes the place of the hospital. If while the university at one time expressed interest in some kind of a swap, the university could not do that unless the master plan is changed and unless the rezoning is amended. That's the process that the planning board is now engaged in.
Yes, and could you identify yourself before speaking? I identified these two.
My name is Thomasine Shiro. I live in Borough. I have a question regarding all of this rezoning. Do we know a time frame? Are we aware of a deadline or when the zoning change is going to be made so that we can have input before it happens and we're not aware that it's going on? I mean, because they could be doing this right now and we don't know about it. So I'm just curious if there's a public time frame that will tell us the rezoning will be done at this particular time.
Is there a
5 years, 5 years after the hospital get a deed on the property they want.
Well,
no, I'm just serious.
exactly. That's why we're doing it now,
Yes.
not waiting till
Right.
later,
Okay,
and
but
hoping that there's influence.
I mean, the
Rather than
hospital
hoping-
is not going to move to a new building for 5 years. So, or let's say 3 years at the maximum. So there is a process that is going to be ongoing, I suspect, all through this period in which this community
Well, is there
tries
a
to
schedule
find.
of zoning committee meetings so that we know when
The
we...
schedule has not been established yet, but we would hope that the schedule would move expeditiously so that we can stay ahead of the hospital's interest in reselling the property. And that before they put out RFPs and advertisements for selling it, that anybody that was a potential buyer would know what the limits are and what they could expect to do.
Tommy, Professor Royce is the chair of the Borough Zoning Board.
Wonderful.
He's in the phone book.
Anyone who phones me after 9 o'clock at night will get an obscene response. Email is much safer.
Well, that's one of the items that we
But
want.
be clear about this. The zoning board has nothing to do with planning. The zoning board takes a series of things that the legislature has approved, and it decides if you can make little tweaks on those to achieve some objective that, on balance, we believe is an advantage to the community rather than a disadvantage. The people that you've really got to get to and get to think about the problem in the way that you would like is the planning board. They are a public board, just as the zoning board is public. They have public hearings, and you have to go and be heard if, at those
right.
opportunities.
Yes, Anne?
Ann Neumann, Borough resident. But like the zoning board, the planning board is primarily reactive. It reacts to projects that have been brought to it, as I understand it. And I would like to recommend that while we think about rezoning the hospital site, we think about revising the master plan, because many communities have master plans that include more in them, and try to engineer retail and residential use in a much more effective and detailed way than I take it our master plan does. So this might be a God-given opportunity to remaster the master plan.
No,
Wanda, I think you or Marv ought Wanda is the chair of the master plan.
No, the planning
The
board.
planning board. Marvin is the chair of the master plan. Yana and I and Bill are all on the planning board. So we're all sitting here listening and agreeing. I'm Gail Ullman. And they can tell you what the process will be, maybe not what the time frame will be, but there is a process. It will be extraordinarily public, I can assure you of that. There's just no way that it can't be. So it has to be, and besides it will be. So, but why don't you sort of explain what the process will be? Sorry.
Thank you.
Let me begin with the task force report. This will go to both of the governing bodies. Marvin will appear before them. I'm presuming they're going to refer it back to the planning board. We've discussed which committees will be involved in this. The planning board has various subcommittees. Marvin is chair of the master plan committee, and they will be taking the first crack at this and looking at what should happen in this space. And there will be, from time to time, public participation meetings in which the public can come and comment. But all planning board meetings are public meetings under the Sunshine Law. Master plan usually meets about monthly at 9 o'clock in the morning. It will probably meet more frequently. It's quite often a Tuesday, but none of this has been set yet. As we progress and look at this, then there's a second subcommittee called the Zoning Amendment Review Committee. These are the people who will be actually making the changes in the ordinance and recommending the ordinance changes to the governing bodies, and the governing bodies will or will not adopt them or make changes also. As far as changing the master plan, we went through and sort of updated the master plan a couple of years ago, and Princeton Future was very active in pushing for this and being involved in this. It was, in some senses, an abbreviated update, but we do update various parts of it all the time. Within the last year, we've done work on open space. There are new maps of the open space trails and so on. And Marv and his committee are very active, and we do work on the various elements. I know that what you're talking about are guidelines, which a lot of master plans incorporate. We haven't moved to that point because, quite frankly, it takes a lot of consultant work and a lot of time. And we're a very, very busy board, so we welcome public input because this is how we find out what the community wants. And I'd like to invite all of you to come to the master plan meetings and to the planning board meetings. And there will be a chance for you to say how you feel about this. So, Mark, would you want to think?
Well, there's no question about that whatever happens at the hospital site is going to be different. And that it isn't just what happens on that site, because whatever happens there has an impact both above and below. And the kind of things you've been doing here affect that. And it would be very helpful, not only for whatever you have in way of input for the hospital site, but these other changes probably should come to us as well, because it may very well be, in order to have a balanced in what happened in the development, that not only is there certain parameters that apply to the hospital site, but to balance that off, we ought to apply other parameters to the area to the north and the area to the south. So keep at it.
Wonderful. I think that concludes a little bit of our background, moving into what we'd hoped would also be further discussion on what is the southern section of Witherspoon Street. We sort of, when we had our 3 workshops, it seemed that the central section moved on into a second meeting, so we didn't quite do the level of work, and we were hoping with merchants here, we would also be able to gain their input. I'm going to ask Michael to take us through the southern sections.
Well, what we had done really up till now sort of brings us to here, and I will report to all of you here and the merchants, but I think the sense, I know the sense we got from the community was that there should be a line here, that this is one kind of neighborhood and the downtown is another. And the kind of sketching that's happening here, that there are large continuous buildings down here. Starting right here, there are smaller buildings that are independent from each other with a kind of grain. There's a kind of scale of use right here, where you have an intimate mixture, as opposed to the very red zone down here with some residences up on top. So that the feeling was that downtown was downtown, and that downtown creep should not occur. So,
Just click on camera.
So that's where we were, and we were hoping that there are a series of issues down here. I mean, there are housing issues down here as well as here. I mean, there are people living upstairs.
I think your mic is turned off.
Turn on the mic. The clip is in the
I don't know if anybody remembers my partner, Fred Travisano, when I first moved here. Actually, Fred lived above Lahier's and resided downtown. And he had a little office upstairs, and the best thing about it was room service. My office is now, we did another building downtown, and we're now over the bagel shop or sushi shop. So we've kept our, but that's one aspect of the kind of character down here. Clearly, people felt that at least in this zone and this zone, we should not encourage. I think we should try in our discussion of this that I feel that there should be some layered living, so to speak, that it's not always housing all the way down, or it's not always hospital all the way up, or commercial all the way up. That there is some sort of vertical mixing that might be desirable here. Also, even in terms of housing types. There are still issues surrounding the completion of the square and public access, the location of bus service, the whole area back here with the access by the liquor store here to this zone back here that we might hear from today, because there was always talk about a walkway. There are whole issues of which we have on this one, but there was some discussion in our table about the Griggs Corner site and what that might be. So we've never really had a discussion, so now would be the time to have it from the floor of what suggestions and what you might like to add to what we have started downtown. My suspicion is that, Marvin Reed probably rightly understands that probably the major contribution of this study would be this zone, because we have a lot of study on this zone. But we do not want to leave it out, because clearly there's always impact and relationships between the parts. So tonight is the night to do that, to talk about the downtown. Also, I don't know if someone had is there a movie about the whole, I don't know what, it's a power station, some station, whatever, might be, if in fact, you see that site were available for something or other or not, and the Griggs site is open for something or other or not.
The Griggs site.
It's where the parking lot.
Michael, for the non-architects in the room, why don't you actually show them the building we're in and explain maybe a little more?
We are right here. If you look out there, you're looking right out that way, with this building on your left over there. If you were to look across the street, you would see this open parking lot, the Japanese restaurant. There used to be a mail store there. What I thought was a Cuban restaurant, but it's a cigar store. I so much wanted a Cuban restaurant. I haven't eaten since breakfast. All analogies will become food. And then this is Witherspoon Street going up to Nassau Hall, and the main downtown area right here. This little area right back in here needs discussion. So,
I'd like to ask a question.
yes.
Has anyone talked to the
Here,
people who
here.
own the Griggs site?
Yes,
And
well,
about what they want?
yes. Actually, they came to one of our meetings earlier, and we are assuming that what they want to do is develop the site.
Okay.
I support their developing the site, and I am willing to stop right there and tell the truth. I would like them to come, and do something, because it's a wonderful site, and it would be a great opportunity for downtown. However, it is in their hands, and I think respectfully belongs to them.
Eric, if there are comments to relay to them, this would be a time to make them. Do you have an idea, or anybody?
No,
has
I
an
don't
idea?
have an idea. I just wondered how they felt about it,
Right.
whether
Good
they
comment.
want to change or anything.
So, anybody
they
want
want
to talk about downtown? Over here, yes, ma'am.
How did we get a Subway store there?
I suspect it's the magic of capitalism at work. People rent, it's free enterprise.
I think my point is a larger one, that do we want more formula restaurants and formula stores in Princeton than we already have? A formula restaurant being one that has to look like every other store in the chain, every other restaurant in the chain, and serve the same menu. And a formula store, as I take it, being something like the Gap, where everything is always displayed uniformly from one Gap to the other as the seasons change. I would assume and I would hope that part of what people would say at this meeting, certainly it's what I'm about to say, is that we'd like to hold the line on Witherspoon Street against formula stores, chain stores, national chains, and national chain restaurants. And if the zoning, I don't quite understand how we managed to hold the line at Burger King on Nassau Street and wound up with a Subway on Witherspoon Street, when we already have Hoagie Haven.
How about our merchants? Can our merchants help us tonight? Part of the reason we're having this meeting tonight is so maybe you could catch up with us. So if there's any comment.
You want to tell me when you want to
You have a lot of restaurants. I'm Charlotte Bialik. I'm on the school board, which is irrelevant to my comment now. I miss the hardware store. There's no pharmacy. There's no real sort of utility and uses store right now in the downtown area. You can go clothing shopping or books, but you can't pick up batteries. And I think we really do need to look a little bit more at the utilitarian side of the commercial aspect of downtown.
Or pharmacies on Witherspoon.
Sorry.
Or
There is a pharmacy on Witherspoon.
Pharmacy on Witherspoon.
Yeah, but we're talking about the downtown section near the university.
You can buy batteries at the kiosk.
Here. Thank you.
Mr. Hilton. I'm Nick Hilton. I'm interrupting you, I'm sorry. I have you want help? I doubt you want my help, but I have two things to say. One is that I'm, as a local merchant or a local retailer, this may not be the appropriate time to say it, but you asked, so. It's sort of tangential to what this lady said, that if I lived in Morristown or in Freehold or in Ewing, I don't see any reason why I would come to Princeton to shop. Unless what I think is that there's a sort of this, whatever you call those formula stores, the national chain stores that are able to pay rent in Palmer Square in the Central Business District. The rents are as high as they would be in malls. All those stores are already in all the malls. Consequently, the downtown Princeton area has no real character. If you went to Greenwich, Connecticut, or to towns of that nature, there's a reason to go downtown to shop because those towns have locally owned, unique, and unusual shops. Erkins went out of business because he lost 25% of his business the first year that Home Depot opened, and he never got it back. At least that's what he told me. I don't know whether competition, whether we're ever going to be able to brook the competition, but to have mall stores in the downtown seems to me kind of, why would somebody come and put up with the congestion and the parking that's, that's endemic to any downtown, to shop at stores that they could go and park in a lot and walk to real easily. So that's a concern of mine, that Princeton sort of does, although it has the university, what it has in retailing is kind of squashed out. Stores like mine are kind of squashed out to the outside where the rents are lower, where we should be able to be, I think.
So why do so many people come to town on Saturdays?
Well, if they come to town, you should find, I've heard a lot that there's a lot of people walking around on Witherspoon Street and walking around on Nassau Street that don't shop there. But I could be wrong. It's just anecdotal evidence. And let me know if I'm wrong. Then I'll stop having this idea, which would be great because I need to sleep.
I'd like to have $1 in my pocket for everybody who comes in Princeton and doesn't buy a thing, because it's happening. Just like they go to a mall and walk around, don't buy a thing. And let's face it, there's no nice way to say this. Princeton's 20, 35% higher than anybody else. Why would you come here?
So why do they?
Here, here.
For a lot of different reasons.
Well, that's what I'm getting at. What are they? And what should we do in our planning?
Well, they might come to sightsee. You'd be surprised. That takes place too.
Right.
We do have a few stores that draw people from out of town. Apparently one of them, one of the big draws in Princeton, is the Princeton Record Exchange. People come from all over the East Coast to visit that store. And I would say that Macauber's Books is a happy exception to some of what's happening in the downtown. But I think Ms. Gunning understood when I talked about changing the master plan earlier that there are communities that have changed their zoning ordinances to make it harder and harder for formula stores and formula restaurants to enter a downtown, and we could do that too. And I guess one of the things that I've been wondering is, since the meeting started, is why is this meeting being held under the auspices of Princeton Future? Why isn't it the planning board or the master plan subcommittee of the planning board that called this meeting? I don't know that it's necessarily the case that, well, let me just leave it at that.
Any other comment? Bob? Bob Geddes, co-chair of Princeton Future.
Thank you for asking that question. Princeton Future's purpose is to be a civic participatory organization that tries to help the elected representative government be better. That's all it does. It's a kind of what-if organization. Let's go back in history 5 years ago. There was a parking lot here, and the issues of what that parking lot ought to be, the what-if issues were discussed in meetings just like this. We weren't fortunate enough to have this room. We had to meet elsewhere. But this room came about as a result of those what-if meetings. The idea of the square, the idea of the walkways, the idea of a parking garage woven into a downtown, but one which you didn't see all the time. In fact, one that just became part of the general fabric. All those ideas came up in what-if meetings, and that's what this is. It's a what-if meeting, and there should be many of these. There is, though, having said that, there's a fundamental structural difference between what would occur in the discussions 5 years ago and tonight. Tonight, we have to deal with the reality that we don't own the land. The government owned the land, and it was our land, really. We don't own the land. And we have to begin to think about what does that mean? What procedures, what institutions, what kinds what process could there be to influence the future when we don't own the land?
Any other comment?
I think people can hear me without the mic, is that correct?
But it doesn't.
Oh, it doesn't go to the TV, sorry. I think that we need some sort of a Princeton Development Board. I think that's a very good point that Bob Geddes has made, that we don't own the land in this case. Perhaps some sort of a development corporation, whether it's civic or private, should be formed in order to buy the land.